Today, we dive into one of the most chilling cases along the coastline, a story of abduction, hidden horrors, and a father's shocking discovery. Meet Mark, the father who stumbled upon a nightmare in the bushes by the ocean, and the young girl whose life hung by a thread. You won't believe how this case unfolded and the dark secrets it revealed. Stay with us until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss these gripping true crime stories. The morning air was unusually sharp, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed from the crashing waves along the coastline. Mark had walked this stretch countless times before, using the routine to clear his mind and escape the pressures of daily life. The rocky cliffs and scattered driftwood had always offered a sense of peace, a quiet rhythm in a world that often felt chaotic. But that morning, something felt different. The birds were quieter than usual, and the rustling of the bushes seemed almost deliberate, as if the landscape itself were holding its breath. Mark tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to his imagination. Yet a strange pull drew him toward the thick patch of shrubs that grew closer to the cliff's edge. The sun, rising slowly over the horizon, cast long shadows across the path, and the shifting light seemed to reveal shapes that weren't there moments before. He slowed his pace, scanning the ground and the undergrowth, expecting to see only the familiar seaweed, shells, and the occasional piece of driftwood. Instead, his eyes caught a movement, subtle but unmistakable, within the dense foliage. It was small, almost hidden, yet entirely out of place. A knot of unease twisted in his stomach, urging him to turn back, yet something stronger pushed him forward. Mark's mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Could it be an animal? A lost pet? The rational part of him searched for explanations, but the instinctual part told him that this was no ordinary scene. Each step closer heightened the tension, the sound of the ocean mingling with the rapid beat of his heart. The wind shifted, and for a brief moment, he felt like he was being watched, as though the bushes themselves held secrets that were never meant to be uncovered. And then he saw it. A small, barely discernible bundle, partially concealed among the leaves, and the full weight of dread settled over him like a stone. Mark's heart pounded as he stood frozen, staring at the small bundle in the bushes. At first, he wanted to tell himself it was just a piece of trash, maybe some discarded clothing blown from the cliffs above. But the shape was undeniably human, and the subtle movements betrayed life. The leaves around it were torn and scattered, as if something, or someone, had struggled to hide it. The closer he stepped, the more his stomach churned with unease. A cold sweat ran down his back as he realized the figure was small, fragile, and unmistakably a child. The wind carried the faint scent of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic and sickening, that made his stomach twist further. Instinct screamed at him to call out, to get help, yet fear and disbelief held him in place. He crouched carefully, trying not to startle whatever, or whoever, was in the bush. The girl's eyes flickered open, wide with terror, and she pressed herself further into the undergrowth, seeking safety in the shadow of the thick foliage. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her skin marred with scratches and bruises. Mark could see the signs of neglect and fear, and a wave of sorrow washed over him, mingled with a sharp spike of anger at whoever could have left her here. Time seemed to stretch as he weighed his next move, knowing every second could make a difference. He fumbled for his phone with trembling hands, calling emergency services while keeping a vigilant watch on the surrounding area. The waves crashed relentlessly behind him, masking his voice and footsteps. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. As he waited, he noticed small details that added to the horror: the flattened grass where she had been dragged, faint footprints leading into the bushes, and a broken wristwatch near her side. Each discovery tightened the grip of dread, confirming that this was not a random accident, but the deliberate work of someone with cruel intent. The girl's rescue was only the beginning of a nightmare that would unfold slowly, revealing the depth of her suffering. Paramedics arrived swiftly, lifting her gently from the bushes and wrapping her in a warm blanket. Despite their reassurances, her eyes remained wide with terror, scanning the empty coastline, as if expecting danger to reappear at any moment. She was taken to the hospital, where doctors worked quickly to treat her cuts, bruises, and exhaustion. Every movement she made suggested she had been in hiding for days, perhaps longer, and her small frame trembled with a mixture of cold, hunger, and fear. The hospital staff were careful not to overwhelm her, knowing that the right approach could coax some information from her fragile state. Outside, investigators combed the area, searching for anything that might hint at who had left her there or why. The rocky cliffs, the dense bushes, and the narrow paths all became part of a meticulous examination, each detail cataloged and photographed. For Mark, the experience was surreal. The girl's presence lingered in his mind, her terrified eyes haunting him long after he returned home. The authorities faced a complex puzzle. The girl could provide clues, but her fear and the trauma she had endured made it difficult to extract coherent information. Pieces of her story emerged slowly, fragmented and alarming. She had been abducted days earlier, moved under cover of night, and left in the remote area near the ocean. Each revelation raised new questions. Who had taken her? How had they chosen this spot? And how many others might have suffered the same fate? The community, once reassured by the routine quiet of the coastline, now faced a chilling reality. The disappearance of children, the hidden paths, and the dense, concealing bushes formed a pattern that suggested the presence of someone operating with cruel precision. Mark's routine morning walk had uncovered more than a lost child. It had exposed a threat lurking quietly, hidden in plain sight. After the girl was safely transported to the hospital, the authorities returned to the scene, determined to uncover every clue the secluded coastline might hold. The dense bushes where she had been found were carefully examined, each branch and leaf scrutinized for signs of struggle. Investigators noticed faint footprints pressed into the damp earth, leading toward a narrow, winding path that disappeared abruptly at the cliffside. It was clear the perpetrator had planned the drop-off meticulously, selecting a location that was difficult to access and easy to hide in. Among the undergrowth, officers discovered small objects that didn't belong in the natural landscape, scraps of cloth, a broken shoe, and faint markings etched into the bark of trees. The symbols were puzzling, cryptic scratches that seemed intentional but offered no immediate explanation. They suggested the possibility of ritualistic behavior, or at least an obsessive compulsion to leave signs that only the perpetrator could understand. The investigators documented everything, knowing that even the smallest detail might connect to other unsolved cases. Forensic teams took soil samples, examined the leaves for fibers, and captured detailed photographs of the scene. Each discovery added to the growing sense of horror. The realization that this location was not randomly chosen, but carefully prepared as a temporary hiding place. As the day wore on, the team widened their search along the cliffs, finding other subtle signs, disturbed vegetation, more cryptic markings, and small items that hinted at previous victims. Every clue deepened the mystery, revealing the patience and precision of someone who had been operating in this area for years without detection. For Mark, revisiting the spot with investigators was surreal. The place that had once seemed peaceful and familiar now felt menacing, as though the ocean breeze itself carried whispers of the atrocities committed nearby. The hidden clues in the bushes were not just physical evidence. They were a stark warning of the darkness that had been lurking quietly, unseen, along the coastline. As the investigation unfolded, authorities began digging into missing persons reports from the surrounding region. A disturbing pattern emerged. Several children had vanished along this same coastline over the past 5 years. Each case had initially been treated as an isolated incident, runaways, accidents, or miscommunications between parents and local authorities, but the similarities were too striking to ignore. All the disappearances occurred during late evenings or early mornings, and each child had been reported missing under circumstances that left little trace of their whereabouts. What shocked investigators most was the geography. Every child had been last seen within a few miles of the cliffs and bushy paths where Mark had discovered the girl. The realization that someone could have been targeting children in this area for years sent a ripple of fear through the local community. Parents grew anxious, remembering the stories they had dismissed as mere bad luck. Law enforcement compiled timelines, attempting to overlay each disappearance onto maps of the coastline. Subtle correlations began to emerge, similar types of clothing left behind, small objects missing from homes, and the presence of faint, almost imperceptible markings in secluded areas. These details, once overlooked, now formed a chilling blueprint of the perpetrator's movements. Detectives theorized that the individual had been studying the area for years, learning the paths, the blind spots, and the routines of local families. The girl's discovery provided the first tangible connection between these previously unlinked cases. Every piece of evidence suggested that the coastline was not simply a random hiding spot. It was a carefully chosen hunting ground, selected for its isolation and the cover it provided. The implications were terrifying. A predator had been operating with impunity, manipulating the environment to conceal his actions, and leaving only subtle signs for the vigilant or the unlucky to uncover. The investigators now faced the daunting task of piecing together a network of crimes that had remained hidden in plain sight for far too long. The investigation reached a critical turning point when authorities reviewed CCTV footage from nearby roads and properties. The cameras had rarely captured anything unusual in this quiet coastal area, but now, every frame became crucial. Analysts noticed a shadowy figure moving along the narrow cliffside paths at odd hours, always avoiding the few cameras in place. The person moved with deliberate speed and caution, carrying small bundles that were indistinguishable at first, but seemed to match the condition of the children described in missing persons reports. The figure disappeared into the thick undergrowth, leaving no trace, almost as if the bushes themselves had swallowed them whole. Law enforcement pored over the footage frame by frame, attempting to identify the person, but nothing concrete emerged. No recognizable features, no identifying clothing, nothing that could provide a lead. The anonymity of the perpetrator added a suffocating tension to the case. Despite modern technology, they remained invisible, always one step ahead. Investigators began mapping the shadowy figure's movements, cross-referencing times, locations, and patterns of previous disappearances. It became evident that the perpetrator had intimate knowledge of the area and had adapted their actions to avoid detection completely. Forensic specialists speculated that they had studied the camera's blind spots and the patrol schedules, meticulously planning each movement. The realization that someone could operate with such precision for years without being caught was both frightening and demoralizing. Local residents, once comforted by the routine quiet of the coastline, were now gripped by fear. Parents kept their children close, and even casual walks along the cliffs felt unsafe. The community's sense of security had been shattered. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, became a source of anxiety. Authorities knew that the key to solving the case rested on patience, careful observation, and the hope that the perpetrator would eventually make a mistake. A single misstep that would finally reveal the person who had haunted the coastline for so long. Months of investigation seemed to stall despite the tireless efforts of law enforcement. Leads went cold, and every potential witness or tip initially ended in frustration. The coastline yielded few new clues, and the shadowy figure remained elusive, leaving investigators anxious and exhausted. Then, unexpectedly, an anonymous tip arrived, brief but precise. It described a hidden shed along a deserted inland road, a location that had escaped prior searches because it was tucked behind overgrown trees and fences. Authorities approached cautiously, aware that the tip could be a trap or a dead end, but what they discovered inside stunned them. The shed was organized in a methodical yet chilling way, with detailed records documenting missing children, photographs, and personal items carefully cataloged. There were bundles of clothing, notebooks filled with dates and locations, and even maps marking areas along the coastline where victims had been abducted or left. It was immediately clear that the perpetrator had been obsessively planning these crimes for years, tracking each child with meticulous care. Evidence of surveillance equipment suggested that the individual had monitored families and patrols, ensuring the successful execution of each abduction. Forensic teams cataloged every item, understanding that this shed held the key to solving multiple cold cases. The discovery also revealed the scale of the crimes, which far exceeded initial estimates. Investigators felt a grim satisfaction that the anonymous tip had unlocked a critical piece of the puzzle, exposing the predator's obsessive attention to detail and his deliberate cruelty. The shed, once hidden and unknown, provided the clarity needed to connect missing children to the coastline and the shadowy figure in the CCTV footage. What had once been a string of unsolved mysteries suddenly became a map of intentional, calculated evil, giving law enforcement the evidence and direction needed to finally bring the perpetrator to justice. The arrest of the perpetrator brought a mix of relief and lingering unease. Law enforcement moved quickly after securing the shed and corroborating the evidence with previous cases. The man was taken into custody without incident, but the details uncovered during the investigation painted a disturbing picture of years of calculated abuse and manipulation. For the girl, recovery was gradual. Doctors and therapists worked to treat both her physical injuries and the psychological trauma she had endured. Her parents were reunited with her, tears and relief mingling with the heavy shadow of what had happened. Even in safety, however, the scars of fear and mistrust remained. The community, once complacent in its perception of the quiet coastline, began to process the chilling reality of the predator who had operated in plain sight for so long. Residents took cautious steps, parents walked their children to school, and local authorities implemented stricter surveillance along paths and secluded areas. For Mark, the father whose morning walk had uncovered the nightmare, the experience remained haunting. The memory of the girl hidden in the bushes, her wide eyes filled with terror, replayed in his mind relentlessly. Yet he also carried a sense of quiet pride. His attentiveness and instinct had made a difference, saving a life that might have been lost. The case left a lasting impression on investigators as well, highlighting the importance of persistence, observation, and community vigilance. Though justice had been served, the ordeal reminded everyone that danger can lurk where it is least expected, and that courage, even in ordinary circumstances, can uncover the unimaginable. Mark's discovery was a testament to that truth. In the end, the ocean continued to crash against the cliffs, the bushes swayed in the wind, and life slowly returned to normal along the coastline. But the story of what had happened would linger, a stark reminder that vigilance and care can save lives when darkness hides in plain sight.